I have today signed an executive order providing for the establishment of a Peace Corps.
Vitally important, Ukraine announced it would soon be leaving the Soviet Union.
Our new Peace Corps program will bring volunteers to help develop small businesses and build personal links between our two peoples.
I'm talking to Terry Rogers, who served in Ukraine from 1993 to 1995, working in community economic development.
That's more or less. That's the closest equivalent of what we did.
My name is Sabra Ayers, and I was in Ukraine, and I served from 1995 until 1997.
I'm Peggy Walton, and I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Ukraine from 1994 to 1996. I was an English teacher trainer, and I was the luckiest Peace Corps volunteer in the whole world.
Kiev was a dark city. Remember, this is a few months after Ukraine were independent. They were still working out basic things like electrical systems and supplying food. And so it was a very desperate time for Ukraine.
It was 3 years after independence, and so the country was very poor and still very communist-like. It's hard to describe how different that is in a setting from the United States in terms of the poverty of people, the lack of opportunity that they have had, and living conditions.
People were struggling, which is why I think there weren't a lot of stores. Our salary then was $188 a month, which was like an exorbitant paycheck for my colleagues when I finally got to my site. It was a huge amount of money to them because they weren't getting paid. And I remember one time they went 6 months without a paycheck. Okay, maybe it was 4 months. No paycheck, my fellow teachers. And they were like, and all of a sudden they're all carrying around these big sacks of potatoes. I'm like, why does everyone have potatoes? They're like, we got our salary. I'm like, you guys all want potatoes? They're like, no, that's our salary.
We originally were trained in the Ukrainian language. But at that time, in fact, Russian was a dominant language in Ukraine. It was difficult to learn a language when you would go to the streets and not hear it. You would hear something close to it, Russian, but not Ukrainian.
We were taught Ukrainian during training because that is the official language of the country. However, when I was placed in the East where people only speak Russian. People say the languages are related, and they probably are, but to me they're very different. But I resolved to myself that my goal there was to help other people learn English, and my learning Russian or Ukrainian was secondary.
We all started in Ukrainian classes, which for me was like, whatever, I mean, it's Ukraine, so we learn Ukrainian. I mean, I was aware that like Russian was widely spoken there, but I didn't cross my mind. I just started learning Ukrainian, and that's what they told us to learn. And I remember we had like a meeting about it, and they said, can some of us who are put way in the East, can we switch to Russian? And our language instructor, our language coordinator, passionately stood up and said, no, this is Ukraine. If you're going to live in Ukraine, you're going to speak Ukrainian. She was kind of angry that we were asking that. And I remember that struck me.
I was originally placed in the town of Cherkasy, the city of Cherkasy. I was placed with the city government to work on privatization. At the time, the city owned almost all the businesses in the city. And everyone understood that could not last. I was there 9 months, maybe 10 months. It wasn't the most productive 10 months. We had a woman in the city government who would really want us there. 3 weeks after we arrived, and she could get things done, she got in a tremendous car accident. And for the next 6 months, she was gone. There were 2 of us there in the city government. They really pushed to have us there, disappeared. And believe it or not, privatization is a political event. It doesn't have a lot to do with economics. It has to do with who gets what and made that decision. Everyone I worked in the city of Cherkasy was a member of the Communist Party. I met some arch Marxist-Leninist people, not your average Western person who do it because it's a flavor of the month. These are hardened communists. And they still had a role in Ukrainian government. I would think everyone agreed in Cherkasy at that time we were not that successful. We were able to attract the attention of the International Finance Corporation in Kyiv, who were charged with organizing privatization auctions. And we were able to get them to start the first one in the country outside Kyiv in Cherkasy. It was successful, but I'm not certain we made a lot of friends in city power structures with that. The city of Cherkasy say, why are we paying hotel rooms for these guys and they're not doing much, and maybe they should go. I was removed from Cherkasy, and the Peace Corps immediately found me a great position in the Poltava Cooperative Institute. Poltava is a very nice city. It's a historic city. And there was plenty to do. There was lots of food. Poltava is a perfect farming area. When I mean perfect, they can grow anything. I taught things like banking and private business and business English for the final year and a half.
I was placed in the third largest city in Ukraine, about 200 miles, I think it is, south of Kyiv, along the Dnieper River. The name of it then was Dnipropetrovsk, and we used to call it, with terms of endearment, of DP. It was the site of the missile building in all of the Soviet Union. DP really didn't exist on many maps because of the sensitivity of its what the work was done there. And it was all underground, so no satellite could see it. And it was a closed city because of the sensitivity of what was done there. And so people were really not used to seeing foreigners. It was the winter time, and I think it was the first year I was there. So I know that I looked really funny. I don't look Ukrainian, and I didn't dress like a Ukrainian. But in the wintertime, I really didn't look Ukrainian. I had this funny hat from REI that sort of tied under my chin and covered my ear and had this puffy top. That's not at all Ukrainian. I had this long wool coat, and then I had these galumpy old boots, rubber boots with good soles, so I wouldn't slip on the glazed ice because the sidewalks weren't cleaned. And Ukrainian women trip across this ice on their high heels, and I just looked at them like, how do you do this? So here I am galumping along. I was going to the teacher class, and I hear these kids behind me, like 5 or 6 kids, and I had a sufficient proficiency to understand a little bit of what they were saying. And they were talking about me. So I'm up in front of them, they're behind me, I'm trudging along, and this one little boy comes around and he's walking backwards in front of me to take a good look at me, and then once he's gotten a sense of what I look like, he ran around to the rest of the kids, and said, blah, 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 this is how she looks. And I thought, oh my, this is being different. I was an English teacher trainer at a recertification institute. So every 5 years, English teachers rotate through this institute, and they take a set of classes. One of their classes that I taught was mainly English conversation. My goal was to help English teachers increase their fluency, their proficiency, their confidence, really, in speaking English. They didn't have to learn how to conjugate verbs because they knew all that. But using those verbs in spontaneous speech was something that they felt uneasy with. We talked about reading maps, directions, and landmarks, singing. Either I can't really sing, but oh well, And then we did the hokey pokey, some group decision making, some writing activities. I tried to give them questions and thought-provoking questions where there was no right or wrong answer, because they were so used to looking for the right answer. So Ukrainian education was like this. Everybody knew everything in the box, but they didn't know much outside of the box. And so to speak spontaneously in English was not what they were used to, because they were used to memorizing dialogues. And this was true when I visited the schools. The kids would recite the same dialogue about the collective farm is beautiful, the sun is shining, the library is full, and everything is fine. But I loved the school visits too. I remember being in one classroom, sitting at the desk, sort of waiting for the kids to come in, and they peeked around the door frame like, what does she look like? This is an American, I've never gotten as much mileage out of my advanced degrees as I did in Ukraine. It's so interesting. People here, I have a doctoral degree, and people here are sort of nonplussed about that in some ways. But there it was, whoa, Dr. Walton. It was strange and very unfamiliar.
I taught at a Ukrainian school in the town of Kharkiv, which is in the Cherkasy Oblast in the center of Ukraine. I don't think I had any idea how challenging it would be. I think I was naively optimistic that the actual job would be fine. My director, I think, recognized that the students would get to practice their English with a native speaker. I don't think she was thinking I was going to really be raising the academic standards of her school. The English books we had, a lot of them were Soviet. They were Soviet English books, and there'd be like dialogues in there about why so many Americans are striking because there's no labor laws to protect them, and look how racist they are. It was Soviet propaganda in these like Ukrainian textbooks. 1995, it was like they were so, and I was in a smaller town, so they didn't have all the fancy ones that Kyiv probably had or whatever. They were like, I had no idea what to do. And I made up my own lessons. Some of their English, it wasn't very good, but they could do, they could textbook stuff, right? So I would say, write me a page describing your bedroom. Describe the bed, describe the window, describe everything you can. And like 4 of them copied each other. It's like, that's amazing that you guys all live together. The school I figured out, was very different from us. Like, you could be a really good student when you're in the 5th grade, but then in the 6th grade, you could maybe not be such a great student. But in the Ukrainian system back then, it was like, if you were a straight A student, you're going to be a straight A student for the rest of your career. It's a different mentality. It's, we're not cheating. I'm helping him because he can't do it. And so I have to help him. I remember being at this, my director, she invited English teachers from around the district and around Kharkiv to come one day, and I was going to speak to them, and we were going to have this luncheon. And then I remember sitting around the table, and a lot of them had never spoken to a native speaker. They kind of asked, all their questions were about like, what are schools like in America? How do they get paid? Do they get paid? Do they ever, all these things that like, it's 1995. They don't know this stuff. At the end of it, this woman said to me, it's been so interesting listening to you because you just speak your mind, and we aren't taught to do that. And it's so nice to hear. And that is kind of when I was like, if I've done nothing for these 2 years, I have impressed upon other teachers what it's like to be an independent American.
This may sound strange. I think our biggest accomplishments were able to prove that peace corps was viable in Ukraine. And I don't think the Peace Corps was convinced that Peace Corps in the former Soviet Union was going to be viable. Nothing they had done before was like it. As an individual basis, I helped out some, but I'm not convinced that it would not have happened without me. The Ukrainians we were working with were very, very intelligent. They just needed some help.
I mean, I didn't teach them English, but for the stage that Ukraine was in, I think my presence was important because it showed the Ukrainians that, like, we see you as a country. You're an independent country. Hello, we'd like to introduce ourselves. I think us just being there was like exposure.
People appreciated my being there. Both New Year's that I was there in DP were big events and affairs that I was invited to people's homes. They really didn't have money to buy food for celebrations, but when they invited me over to dinner, there was these huge spreads, and people gave me things that I wouldn't have given away. I felt so grateful to people for what they had allowed me to learn and experience, that I felt really, really sad and teary when that train pulled out of DP for the last time. It was hard to pull away. It was hard to pull away.
The Ukrainian people reclaimed their independence on December 1st, 1991, and I am proud that the United States was among the first in establishing diplomatic relations.
Що ми, браття козацького